Ben Nevis, this was one I was really looking forward to. 23-year-old Ben Nevis, and the really kind of different, interesting, fun thing about this one in particular is anyone who's had much for Ben Nevis has probably seen it in sherry. This is in a second fill bourbon hogshead, and it gives you a lot of a different side of Ben Nevis that's really, really interesting. And the few that I've had have been some of my favorite whiskeys, and this one's no exception.
Yeah, I have no reason to embarrass myself in a new context, but I'm an honest fellow, and so I'm going to tell you something that doesn't, shine a good light on me. We were tasting this the other night in a retail environment, and I was just sitting with it. I didn't have any notes open. I was just enjoying the conversation. And then Joshua, he and I were doing a paired tasting. He said, Jason, do you want to talk about the Ben Nevis? I said, yeah, absolutely. I was sniffing. I just kind of looked up and I started talking about Ben Nevis and Dunnage Warehouse and a good funkiness to it. But it also shows really well in sherry, and that this is such a good example of that. As Josh, to his credit, took the baton from me, ran with it, and said, Jason's correct to point out that Ben Nevis is really good in sherry. This one, of course, is in bourbon.
And of course, like, Jason.
Right? And I did a like honestly, just sitting there, I was getting these wonderful fruits from it. And not necessarily the dark fruits that you would expect from heavy sherry, but just a nice fruitiness, like a golden raisin kind of quality from it that to me speaks to types of sherry. And so he, again, to Joshua's great credit, he then went on to say, well, talking about the fruit there, yes, we're in a yeast situation. And you talk about the yeast and the fermentation that then comes through the distillation and then into the bourbon maturation. It really lets the fruit come through. And I was like, you're earning your paycheck tonight. Like, you are carrying both of us. So, it's not a great moment when the guy that, co-owns the company and makes, co-makes all of the selections is the guy going, this is lovely Ben Nevis and sherry, isn't it? Isn't this just lovely? But it speaks to, I think, the quality of the Ben Nevis.
Yeah.
And so one thing I would say, just within the company itself, one of the great parts about there being two of us and two whiskey geeks running this company is, in my whiskey history, I had not had good Ben Nevis. And with Joshua and I owning the company, Joshua had happened to have a lot of really good Ben Nevis. And so, of a day, as we tend to do, we're sitting talking about where we might want the company to go, what we might want to be bottling. And he'd say, oh, Ben Nevis is on my list. And I said, Ben Nevis? Really? Ben Nevis? And he, oh, yeah. And so he actually, we were in person. He poured me a Ben Nevis that he really liked. And it was like the first time I'd ever had Ben Nevis in my life. I was, what is this? This is delicious and fantastic and fragrant. There's floral, there's honey, there's Dunnage, there's funk. There's so much good stuff going on in good Ben Nevis, but there's also a ton of terrible Ben Nevis. And so if we hadn't been co-owned, or if I'd owned this with somebody else, there might not be a Ben Nevis. And we've now bottled, I want to say, 3, maybe 4 different Ben Nevis casks. And we stand by every single one of them. And now getting it in bourbon lets the distillery shine through. You get to say, this is what Ben Nevis can distill.
Yeah, that's really the fascinating part about this one to me. I had one other Ben Nevis that was in ex-bourbon, and it was probably one of my favorite pours that I had at the Balmoral in Scotland. It was actually another 1996 too, so it was a 22-year-old at that point. But it was just, that was the guy running the bar. That was the one he recommended of everything that he liked, and I tried it, and it just broke my heart because I knew I couldn't find it. And this is definitely the closest thing that I've had to that. It's giving you that, like you said, like just enough funk to kind of make it interesting, just enough There are peating to a certain level. It's not super high, as I understand, but there's
Yeah, I believe it's
a
just
little bit.
minimal,
Yeah,
and it would be Highland peat, which we'll talk much more of when we get to the Roodvar.
for sure. But there's just enough of like everything to really keep me like kind of second guessing myself every time I go back to the glass. And the fruits, like you were saying, are just amazing on this. This is kind of like tropical,
Yeah.
little bit of it. What it reminded me of, I think I was tasting it yesterday or the day before, and it was one of those like fruit tarts that has the
Mm,
glazed fruit on top. It's like all of that fruit
I know
in one place
exactly what you're
smushed
talking about.
together. Yeah, yeah. That
I know exactly.
made me very happy. The other thing that
But
got me, go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was just going to say, but then to have a 23-year-old whiskey that can be this lively and vibrant
Yeah.
is beyond the norm,
Yeah.
and not something I would really go looking for in a whiskey that was north of 20 years old. For me, once you get to about 18, I always think you're starting to kind of tip the balance on quality return.
Hmm.
Maybe even 15 to 18 might be where it starts to tip.
Just in terms of how much you're paying for a bottle versus how much the quality is improving, or
Partly it's that trade-off, quality versus money spent, but also for me, it becomes very mellow.
yeah,
And then as it starts climbing, you're losing, I think, the expression of the spirit. You're getting more of the wood on that.
less
You know,
distillery character usually.
yeah. And so to have something at 23 that is still shiny and effervescent, it's so funny. I always say this to people. Whenever I'm tasting these whiskies, I really am tasting them within the context of Scotch whiskey.
Hmm.
And so I will say things about what is my own whiskey that really sounds like I'm a bit of an asshole. But for me, this is just a Ben Nevis that exists within the history of Ben Nevis
Yeah.
and within the whiskey industry. And so I comment accordingly.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to say, oh, Jason and Joshua have selected the best Ben Nevis you will ever encounter. I'm just saying, damn, that's a good Ben Nevis. And we were really lucky that it came across our desks. And then we selected it and bottled it. And now you're selling it. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Takes a village.
Mm-hmm. The
But
one thing I was,
I'll
yeah.
do it as well because we go from when we select to then the wheels of bureaucracy turning
Mm.
to then actually getting it into a bottle to then getting it imported. We can
Takes a
go
minute.
6 months from selecting it to then having it in bottle. And because it's the retail line, it's not like I've got bottles of our retail line lying around my house. I sometimes only get to taste these when I go and do a tasting.
Yeah.
And either it's a store like yourself that's got them or it's a bar that's got them. And there will be times when I've gone 6 months from selection to tasting night. Um, and I'll just go, damn, that's good. Damn, that's
That's nice.
good. Like not because I'm awesome, but because like that's good whiskey that went in that bottle.
Right. You're just like, good job, Jason, from six
Yeah,
months ago.
just 100%. Yeah, 100%. Good job, past Jason
Right.
and past Joshua.
Yes, yes. Man. The part of the reason that I kind of got into like looking at Ben Nevis a little more seriously at the start, again, kind of having gotten into whiskey in Japan, is they're owned by Nika right now, or the parent company of
Correct.
Nika, I guess.
Correct.
So they're, I don't even know how much I'm supposed to say, but I don't work for any of these companies, so I don't care. But the Takatsuru, if any of you have had that, it's
Yeah.
pretty commonly known that there's a decent bit of Ben Nevis in that.
Yep.
And when you go after having those and you come back to this, you kind of see where it fits into that puzzle piece, especially if you've had their single malts too. So to me, just finding Ben Nevis too was another way of getting something that was reminiscent of what made me fall in love with whiskey in the first place without paying Japanese whiskey prices. Because I'm not affording a 23-year-old Nika these days.
Yeah, I paused for a second, and again, this is the kind of the revisiting the whiskey.
Mm.
On the palate, I almost got this Connecticut cigar wrapper just on the palate. It was just like almost like even when you think about the influence of the cedar box on a Connecticut wrapper cigar, there's a kind of a dryness to it, but a dry spiciness.
Yeah, I don't know cigars as well, but I definitely get. And even on the one we were talking about before, the Invergordon, it's got the age is there, but like you said with the Ben Nevis, there's still a youthful kind of vitality to it, but you get that kind of old, these leathery, notes around the edge, which a lot of people look for in older whiskey, but you get that without the kind of tired feeling that you get sometimes with older whiskeys that are past their prime.
Yeah, and were you saying this is second fill?
This one was, yeah, this does say second fill.
Okay, so check out the color on that second fill.
Yeah,
right.
That's still.
Yeah, 23 years in second fill, you can pull some of the lingering color out of the wood without it being so dark. It is funny. I have such an internal battle, and we'll cover it when we come to the alt more later.
Yeah,
but there's with social media, and I don't want to shit on social media because I use it and I use it for the company and Josh and blah blah blah. But it's interesting when someone posts a photo of a bottle, whether it's a full bottle or a sample bottle or even a glass of whiskey. So long as that whiskey is super dark, people will say, "Oh, that looks delicious. Oh, it looks so delicious." When really it just looks dark. And so for me, there's this trade-off between how dark is it versus how much wood is it delivering. Because if it's really dark, because it has sucked every last inch of life out of the wood, that's going to be difficult to drink. Yeah. And you're going to get all the wood and not very much of the distillery. Whereas, as we're looking at 23 years second fill bourbon, you're trying to get it just dark enough that folk go, "Oh, that looks delicious," even though it's just a color. But you obviously sitting on a retail shelf, we need people to reach for it. We need people to feel engaged with it, or seeing a photo on social media. We need people to want to engage with it. But neither Joshua nor I are color guys. We're texture guys. And you can't get the texture with your eyeballs. And so that speaks to what we talked about in the interview about that level of trust. We need someone to see that and say, that's the right color. It's whiskey colored. But it's a Jason and Joshua selection. I really hope it's got the texture that I've come to know from them, and then the flavors and all the things that go with that. So
yeah, I love this texture thing too, because it's something that I think, especially most people, as you start to get in, and even myself at this stage, was not necessarily something that I was consciously thinking of every time I drank a whiskey. And it was kind of hearing you guys harp on it so much that it's now it's like it's added an entire other dimension to my enjoyment of whiskey and just notes and paying attention to it. And it's even to the point where now I'll be like, "Oh, we've got the whole milk and the skim milk in the refrigerator," and how is that different? Like, it kind of branches out to everything after that. So,
well, that's where it's oftentimes the bottle fill is too high to really get away with it. But when you get a whiskey poured into your glass, as you turn it around and you get to see some of the oils, if you get some good oil in your glass, that there's good flavor going to come with that oil. It is interesting because even just turning this, sometimes you're even looking at how tight is the beading. And the Ben Nevis is pretty tight beading, and then just the occasional drop from that, which lets you know, again, you're dealing with very good oil.
There's a lot of surface tension there then, yeah.
Oh, and so it's funny, right? As we're saying, people looking at the color of it, "Oh, that looks like it will be delicious." Well, we really don't know. The oils, that's what's telling you, "Oh, this is going to be delicious."
That's like the one part that you can actually see.
Right?
That's interesting.
That's really good.
Yeah. So this
Yeah,
is this one. I'll give the warning now because if you guys don't buy this fast enough, I'm going to buy the rest of what we have. So have at it.
yeah, I might end up getting a bottle of it. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
What world would that be?
Yeah, awesome. Anything else on the Ben Nevis or?
These are the moments when Joshua feels really good about himself,
Yeah.
and I try not to give him too much credit,
Mm.
but yeah, without Joshua, to have missed out on something like this would have been a real shame.
He kind of deserves it on this one. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
funny too.
that's but
He actually had corrected me and it's not a big deal correcting me because I don't own half the company too. But I thought this when I saw it on the release sheet, I thought this was a sherry, just because I think just because
hey,
I saw Ben Nevis and was like, oh, sherry Ben Nevis, cool.
thank you for making me feel better.